Hi everyone, you're watching the virtual Amicus and I'm Jay Ludha. So today's topic for discussion would be on international commercial arbitration, its fundamentals and recent legal developments in a career in Litigop hybrid legal practice. Now, before we start the discussion on international commercial arbitration, it is very important for every viewer to understand the role that is played by the United Nations Commission on International Trade Law. Now, what is this? It is a subsidiary body of the United Nations General Assembly that is responsible not just for helping to facilitate international trade, but also to facilitate the investments that are taking place. Now, it is very important for all the viewers to understand that the Indian arbitration is broadly governed and regulated by the Arbitration and Conciliation Act of the 1986 that derives not only its basis from this model of 1985 UNCITRAL model on international commercial arbitration, but also the rules of 1976, because the amendment that took place, the earlier existing provisions of the arbitration in India were contained in three enactments that were: number one, Arbitration Act of 1940, number two, Arbitration Protocol Convention Act of 1937, and number three, Foreign Awards Recognition Enforcement Act of 1961. Now, subsequently, all of these three enactments were replaced by the Arbitration Act of 1986, and it was in the year 2015 that was further amended by the Amendment Act of 2015 to supervise the phase of arbitration, which included within its purview, number one, the domestic arbitration, number two, international commercial arbitration, and number three, enforcement of foreign arbitral awards. Now, where is international commercial arbitration defined under the provisions of the Act? What rules are applicable? Does the venue or the seat have to be within India? Does one of the parties to the agreement have to necessarily be of Indian nationality? So, to elaborate further on this very interesting, intriguing subject, we have with us a very dynamic lawyer who joins us from Jaipur. We have with us Mr. Suvir Gaud. And just to give you all a brief introduction about our amicus for today's session, Mr. Suvir Gaud, he currently is a principal associate and a corporate team head at ASM Law Chambers, Jaipur. And he has actively been involved in the ongoing international commercial arbitration that involves an Indian hospitality company and a Singapore-based hotel management services company. He has also advised and drafted the regulatory report on the modernization of RTOs through the PPE mode in association with Deloitte India. He initially studied his law from Campus Law Center, Faculty of Law at University of Delhi back in 2014. He also finished his company secretary, and subsequently he joined as a junior associate in Link Legal India Law Services, New Delhi, where he worked from July 2014 to October 2014. And ever since then, he moved back to Jaipur and he joined ASM Law Chambers. And he's currently heading the corporate practice there, but he's the corporate team head. So thank you so much, Mr. Gaud, for taking out time on a busy working day. And any first words that you wish to say, anything before we begin our presentation?
The very first words would be that, Jay, you're doing a wonderful job, because the legal fraternity, especially in Jaipur, we are not speaking as much as we should be. We are not enlightening each other on the fields of practice that exist in Jaipur. So I'm really glad that there is this platform created wherein we at least get to know what is the work happening. And it's important because now we can even bounce work off each other, right? Earlier, we thought that there was only certain types of litigation or certain type of work which was available in cities like Jaipur, but I think that misconception has been dispelled, because I have seen some wonderful discussion from on topics ranging from sports law to very niche subjects on your show, and I feel really glad that such kind of work is happening in Jaipur. So I would like to congratulate you for that. And usually this should have been done at the end, but I would like to thank a lot of people because of whom I am in this talk today. I would like to thank my senior, Mr. Ajat Chatru Singh Meena, who also happens to be the managing partner of ASM Law Chambers, which is one of the fastest growing organizations in Rajasthan, I would say. Apart from that, I would like to thank my colleagues, Mr. Dhruv Taylor, Mr. Pankaj Jangir, Mr. Rahul Mahajan, and Mr. Pranav, who have really helped me to prepare for this presentation. And I think that's pretty much it. Let's dive right in. If you have any questions, or I can start with the presentation. I also have a slide share. So in case people cannot really follow, because this happens to be a technical topic, so there is a slideshow, and that is available on demand. If anyone wishes to have the slideshow, they can get in touch with me later after the show.
Was there? Yeah, so the potential was always there, but it's just that we never had this virtual platform where we could showcase it. So thank you so much, Mr. God. The stage is set. The floor is all yours. Over to you.
All right. So first of all, why is international commercial arbitration relevant today? We might think that we are sitting over here, most of the litigation happening is domestic in nature. So why international commercial arbitration? So there are a lot of reasons for that. We understand that the globe has shrunk. We have gone abroad and the world has come to our doorstep. Now, what has happened is that even a common citizen today is in touch with a lot of global organizations in the form of mostly social media. And there is some sort of lack of clarity about who are the entities we are dealing with. Are those entities based in India? Are those entities based abroad? And of course, there is potential ground for a lot of disputes. Now, where arbitration comes into the picture is that internationally, arbitration is one of the most preferred modes of dispute resolution, owing to the flexibility, the choice of experts, and party autonomy that it offers. The traditional systems of countries are usually not preferred by big organizations. And how this links with the framework in India, I think in the Arbitration and Conciliation Act, I think with the exception of the Insolvency Code, the Arbitration Act is one of the most amended acts. And the purpose is that India is aiming to become a global arbitration hub. And we are trying to get our arbitration law in line with international best practices. Hence, international commercial arbitration becomes really relevant for us because now we are faced with, as litigators, we are faced with situations where we have to deal with international commercial arbitration in cities even like Jaipur. The work always existed in tier 1 cities like Mumbai and Delhi and Bangalore. But now the local businesses have gone abroad, and that's why we need to be prepared for a scenario where we have to deal with international commercial arbitration. So that is the background, that is the relevance. And if Jay, you don't have any questions at this point, I would probably like to start sharing the slide that I prepared. Shall I share the slide?
Yeah, please go ahead, Mr. God, please.
Sure. So yeah, the first part that we covered was that why is it relevant today? By the way, this talk is covered into two parts. This talk is divided into two parts. First, we'll be broadly covering international commercial arbitration. The second aspect of this talk, the second part of this talk would be regarding Litigop, which may sound like a fancy word, but it's nothing but a hybrid law practice, which is becoming possible owing to the dynamics of the profession today. That will be an informal discussion, which will be the second half. The first half happens to be international commercial arbitration. We have already discussed why it is relevant. Now is the time to dispel some of the enigma or misconceptions surrounding ICA. We are talking about international commercial arbitration seated in India. At the very onset, international commercial arbitration can be of two types. One is seated in India and one is seated abroad. The law applicable and the procedure applicable is different for both. The theme of this presentation is broadly international commercial arbitration or ICA seated in India. So what are the common enigmas or misconceptions surrounding international commercial arbitration? First of all, usually people think that it is synonymous with arbitral institutional arbitration, and it includes only arbitrations which are conducted outside India, which is not correct. Institutional arbitration is an entirely different concept, whereas there is a designated institution, whether in India or abroad, is involved in conducting the arbitration proceeding. There are arbitration centers, there are established arbitration centers even in India. There is the Mumbai Arbitration Center, there is the Madras Arbitration Center. Those are the arbitrations which have their own sets of rules. We have the International Center for Arbitration. So we are not talking about institutional arbitration when we talk about international commercial arbitration. And also, international commercial arbitration is not just the arbitrations which happen outside the country. It also happens domestic arbitration, arbitrations with seats in India, which I'll be elaborating in the subsequent slides. Now, the second misconception is that practice in international commercial arbitration seated in India requires expert knowledge over and above the knowledge of Arbitration and Conciliation Act 96, which is not true. Arbitration, ICA seated in India is akin to domestic arbitrations in a lot of aspects. There are a few differences, of course, which again we'll elaborate in the subsequent slides and the subsequent part of the presentations. So Even if you're well qualified, if you're well versed with the provisions of the Arbitration and Conciliation Act, you are in a position to deal with international commercial arbitration seated in India. One more popular misconception is that work relating to ICA is available only in tier 1 cities and is restricted to tier 1 law firms. We believe that there is no scope for work related to ICA in tier 2 and tier 3 cities. Nothing could be further away from the truth. We currently in Jaipur are handling international commercial arbitration. The reason is, as I discussed previously, the businesses are going globally. Jaipur also happens to be, not specifically Jaipur, a lot of businesses in India, I think because of e-commerce, have established a global presence. So we are now coming in touch with international businesses and international organizations more than ever. So work is being generated in cities apart from tier 1 and tier 1 cities and tier 1 firms. And this is a field which is wide open right now because there is so much of misconception regarding ICA that even a lot of people who would possibly be offered this work are not willing to take it. So the purpose of this talk is also to let the lawyers know that if you're well versed with Arbitration and Conciliation Act, half of ICA you can already handle because it is very similar to domestic arbitration, as I've already said. Again, recently there was a lot of talk about emergency arbitrator when the Future and Amazon dispute was all over the media. Over there again, there was a very popular misconception which among legal circles also, I heard a lot of people saying that emergency arbitrator is a concept related purely with international commercial arbitration, which again is not true, which again we would be clarifying in the future slides, because a lot of courts have said that emergency arbitrator is not a substantive provision. It is a creation of procedure, and a procedure can be agreed to a party irrespective of whether the arbitration is ICA or a domestic arbitration. So these are the common misconceptions surrounding ICA seated in India. So if these are the misconceptions, then what is the actual position? What does ICA actually mean? So we don't have to go anywhere further. We just have to examine the definition, and that gives us a lot of answers. The definition provided by the Arbitration and Conciliation Act 1996. Now the Arbitration and Conciliation Act 96 is divided into 3 parts. The first part is arbitration. The second part is enforcement of certain foreign awards, and the third part is conciliation. For the purpose of international commercial arbitration, which is seated in India, first part is squarely applicable to both of us. But even for ICAs which are not situated in India, which have a seat outside India, there are certain provisions of part 1 which are applicable. So part 1 again becomes the most important provision for us if we are dealing with any sort of arbitration, whether it is domestic arbitration, whether it is international commercial arbitration seated in India, and to a limited extent, ICA seated abroad as well. So now let us examine the definition. The definition for international commercial arbitration has been provided for in section 21F. So broadly, section 21F of the Act defines an ICA as an arbitration relating to disputes arising out of a legal relationship, which must be considered commercial, where either of the parties, now this is the catchword here, either of the parties is a foreign national or resident, or is a foreign body corporate, or is a company, association, or body of individual whose central management or control is in foreign hands. This position of law has changed slightly because the company has been taken out of the purview as far as control and management is concerned. Otherwise, companies which are incorporated abroad, if there is an arbitration with a company which is incorporated abroad, that will, for the purpose of Arbitration and Conciliation Act, be an international commercial arbitration with a domestic seat. Now, moving further, if we just examine this definition, there are some very important takeaways. Now, what are the takeaways from this definition itself? The first and the most important takeaway is that it is the nature and identity of the parties involved in the arbitration and not the state of arbitration, which determines the nature of arbitral proceedings. That is, whether the proceedings are domestic arbitration or international commercial arbitration, it is determined only by the nature of the parties involved. There is as we discussed, there's a misconception that an ICA is an arbitration which is conducted outside India. Seat is a question which is subsequent to the determination of the nature of arbitration. It is the party, as we discussed, if one of the parties satisfies the criteria provided in 21F, then it becomes becomes an international commercial arbitration. Another important takeaway of the very definition is that part 1 of the Arbitration Act, which is applicable to domestic arbitrations, is squarely applicable to ICAs which are seated in India. For ICAs seated outside India, there are three provisions from Part 1 which are applicable, which happen to be Section 9, which is the provision for interim measures by court, Section 27, which relates to taking of evidence, and Section 37, which provide limited appeals in cases of ICAs which are seated abroad. Now, one misconception which we have not discussed earlier is that I talk to a lot of people and not commenting on their knowledge, but there is a common misconception that the product of an international commercial arbitration is a foreign award. That is not true. The nature of the award, whether it's a foreign award or whether it's just an award, there is no definition of domestic award in the Act. Foreign award has been defined in Part 2. So it is just the seat of arbitration which will determine the nature of the award. So for instance, I'll give you an example. There is an ICA which we are dealing with right now. It is an international commercial arbitration. On one side, there is a Mumbai-based client. On the other side, there is Intercontinental Group, which is a company based incorporated in Singapore. Now the arbitral proceedings are being conducted in India. The rules applicable are Singapore International Center rules. So what will happen? If there is an award passed in this international commercial arbitration, will it be a domestic award or will it be a foreign award? It will no doubt be a domestic award because the seat which is the important concept, the seat is Mumbai. If the same arbitration between the same parties were to be conducted in Singapore, you just have to remember that the applicable rules are still the Singapore International Arbitration Center rules, the same party. If they choose the seat as India, as anywhere in India, then the outcome of that arbitration proceeding would be a domestic award. Now the same set of parties and the same set of rules, they go abroad. Now that becomes a foreign award, and there is the Part 2 of the Arbitration Act which is applicable. So this is one of the very important takeaways, which is I would say clear from the definition itself, but usually it takes a lot more examination than that to arrive at the distinction. Because while foreign award has been defined in Part 2, there is no definition of domestic award. And again, I think as would already have been clear, so does not require reiteration. An international commercial arbitration can have a seat either in India or outside India, and that seat will determine what is the nature of the award passed. So these are the takeaways from the definition itself. Now there would be a question. I have just said that if you have knowledge of Arbitration and Conciliation Act 96, you do not require a specialized skill set if you're dealing with international commercial arbitration, which is seated in India. Why so? Am I saying in any way, am I implying in any way that domestic arbitration and ICA seated in India are pretty much the same, all the provisions are applicable? Well, there is a slight difference, which is the next slide, which we'll deal in the subsequent portion. Now, as we discussed, that the provisions of Part 1 are applicable to both ICA seated in India and domestic arbitrations, but with some changes. There are some modifications. Like for instance, if there is a domestic arbitration, if you have to get an arbitrator appointed, if the agreed procedure fails, you apply it to the High Court concerned. Whereas in the case of ICA, which is seated in India, the very same application under Section 11 will now lie directly with the Supreme Court of India. The High Court will have no role to play. That's at the stage of appointment of arbitrator. Now, if we discuss further, some procedural rules are also different. There is Section 29A, which usually provides for the time limit prescribed for completing the arbitral proceedings. For domestic arbitrations, the time limit happens to be 12 months, with a period of 6 months, which can be granted as an extension. Such time limit is not available, is not provided for international commercial arbitration, which happens to have a seat in India. So this is the second material aspect, which is different for both the cases. Again, now we are discussing a lot about the award. Now we are clear about the fact that an ICA, which is being conducted in India, the product will be a domestic award. Now the grounds for the challenge of a domestic award are provided under Section 34. Section 34 provides a list of grounds on which the award can be set aside. Without going into the details of what Section 34 provides, the important distinction to be noted here is that in domestic arbitrations, the awards passed in domestic arbitration, there is one ground of patent illegality on which the award can be set aside. Now that ground is not available in international commercial arbitrations. So broadly speaking, without overburdening the audience with a lot of technical information, there is a lot of litigation, there is a lot of jurisprudence on foreign awards. But those are international commercial arbitrations which are covered strictly under Part 2 of the Arbitration Act. And I believe that that is beyond the scope of this talk, because the purpose of this talk is to let my wider community know that ICA in India is very much available and it can be practiced. ICA abroad, of course, requires a specialized set of knowledge, because you need to make yourself well versed with the procedural rules applicable there, the substantive law applicable there. And this distinction will become a little clear because of a few recent judgments which have been passed by various judicial authorities, which happens to be the next part of our presentation. So I think now we have already learned a lot about what ICA in India means. There have been discussion about its need. There has been a discussion about what the Act says. There has been a distinction. There has been some discussion about what is the difference between a purely domestic arbitration and an ICA seated in India. Now as I said earlier in this talk, I said earlier that this act is one of the act which is undergoing one of the most fast developments, just to bring it in line with international best practices for arbitration. So accordingly, let us just discuss briefly what a few courts have had to say in matters relating to ICA in India and abroad recently. Now, if we let me tell you that the next portion is called recent legal developments, and this is not strictly in chronological order. So if you're expecting that this is exactly in the order in which these orders have been passed, no, that is not the case. Howsoever, I have tried to make sure that the latest information available regarding any of these provisions or controversies is being provided to the audience. So there has been an important amendment which directly affects international commercial arbitration per se. The Amendment Act of 2021 has just been notified a few months back. Now, the Act of 2019 had introduced a Schedule 8, which contained qualification and experience of arbitrator. Though there is a rider here that this schedule was never officially notified, it was just a part of academic debates. But it provided for a lot of arbitration. It provided for a lot of qualifications for possible arbitrators, and it had a pro-Indian arbitrator bias, going by the very conditions prescribed there, that the person should have been an advocate in India, a chartered accountant. Those provisions were seen to be a roadblock to the appointment of foreign arbitrators who happen to be qualified in a particular subject matter. So now the Amendment Act of 2021 has entirely done away with the provisions of Section Schedule 8. The implication for this would be that now parties would increasingly prefer international commercial arbitrations which are seated in India, because now there is no embargo on having foreign arbitrators even in ICAs seated in India. There was some confusion, though the schedule, as I said, was never notified. And this situation we are also currently facing in the matter that we are dealing with, wherein one of the arbitrators is an Indian arbitrator, the rest are from foreign nationalities. One happens to be from Singapore and the other happens to be from the United Kingdom. So now we see that it's an ICA seated in India, and it has got the best of the arbitrators available in the world. Now, coming to the judgments which have been passed recently. In the judgment of Mankatsu Impex Private Limited versus Air Visual Limited. I'll briefly take you through the facts of the case. In this particular matter, the parties are not clearly specified. The word used was the venue of arbitration. The arbitral proceedings were to be conducted in Hong Kong, and the courts in New Delhi were also given some jurisdiction as per the agreement. So it was pleaded by one of the parties that the seat of arbitration was Delhi, even though the venue was Hong Kong, and accordingly the law applicable in New Delhi should have been applicable to the arbitration proceedings. The Supreme Court was seized of the controversy, and it clarified. It said that the seat of arbitration is very important, because the seat of arbitration decides what will be the supervisory jurisdiction be like. For example, if an ICA is being conducted in India, then it will be subject to the supervision of the courts in India, namely the High Court and the Supreme Court. Now, if the same arbitration is being conducted in Singapore, it will be subject to the legal system which is prevalent in whatever is the appeal system, whatever is the judicial system which is available over there. So the court clarified that the significance of seat of arbitration is that it determines the applicable law when deciding the arbitration proceedings and arbitration procedure, as well as judicial review over the arbitration award. In certain cases, depending on the manifest intention of the parties, even the venue of arbitration can be deemed to be the seat of arbitration. So this question was very important because depending on what the seat of arbitration is, as we have discussed earlier throughout this talk, a lot of provisions change. The applicability of part 1 or part 2 is squarely dependent on whether it is being conducted in India, whether the seat is in India or whether the seat is outside India. Now, again, the next judgment that we are going to talk about is Ashwini Minda and others versus Yushin Limited and others. Now, this is a very interesting case because the concept of emergency arbitrator has been the talk of the town in ICA circles at least. There was a lot of confusion about what is the validity of an order passed by the emergency arbitrator. So in this particular matter, there was an emergency arbitrator. The arbitration was to be conducted as per Japanese law and as per the Japanese provisions, as per the rules of procedure of the Japanese center. So a party unsuccessfully tried to make out a case before the emergency arbitrator, did not get any relief. And now, as we just discussed, that certain provisions of Part 2 arbitrations are also applicable in India, one being Section 9. So the party approached the court under Section 9 and pleaded for some interim relief. So the court gave a very important clarification. It said that although Section 9 is applicable for foreign seated arbitrations, but a party cannot have a bite at the cherry twice. If you have already failed before the emergency arbitrator, then the provision of Section 9 cannot be used as an appellate mechanism to re-agitate the same controversy, especially when the arbitral tribunal had already been constituted. In this case, the arbitral tribunal had already been constituted. So the court clarified. So this gave us a lot of clarity about the fact that there was earlier debate about whether interim measures can be provided for in Part 2 arbitrations. So the answer is clear that yes, Section 9 is applicable to Part 2 arbitrations, but with certain riders. Some of them being that the tribunal should not already have been constituted and it should not be in the nature of an appeal over the order passed by the emergency arbitrator. The next significant judgment is, of course, Amazon in Future. Everyone knows about this case because I think for a while it was the most talked about case because two big ribs involved a very large transaction. So even in this case, again, the controversy was regarding what is an emergency arbitrator. Is it a concept which is recognized under Indian law or specifically the Arbitration and Conciliation Act of 96? So a single bench of the Delhi High Court said that though there is no clarity, there is no specific provision for an emergency arbitrator in India. But the single judge was of the view that a relief passed by the emergency arbitrator is akin to a relief under Section 17. Now, for those who are uninitiated, interim measures can be claimed by parties to an arbitration before two forums. One is before the court and the other is before the tribunal itself. So Section 9 deals with the interim measures by court, whereas Section 17 deals with interim measures by the arbitral tribunal itself. So in this matter, the Delhi High Court was of the opinion that Section 17, if there is an interim relief by an emergency arbitrator, it can be enforced akin to a Section 17 order. Now, subsequently, the division bench of the Delhi High Court did not agree with this opinion, and this order was stayed. The current fate of the matter is that the matter was before the Supreme Court, and the entire proceedings before the Delhi High Court have been put to stay. So I think we'll have to wait for either legislative action to figure out what is the status of emergency arbitrators in India. But for now, the position seems to be really unclear as to what is the validity of an order passed. Can it be enforced by Indian courts? We unfortunately do not have any guidance there yet. But one thing which this judgment did clarify is that on a similar footing as section on whatever the relief is claimed before the emergency arbitrator, a parallel Section 9 can be moved. Now, perhaps the most landmark decisions which has been passed in April 2021. Earlier, there was a lot of confusion about whether two parties, wherein none of them are foreign parties, could they have chosen a foreign seat of arbitration and hence made Part 2 of the Arbitration Act applicable to them. Earlier, the court was of the opinion that there should be some nexus, the business should have been abroad, or some part of the business should have been abroad. The autonomy of the parties should not have extended to the fact that there are two Indian entities with dealings entirely in India and they choosing, for instance, the courts in United Kingdom and the law in United Kingdom to settle their disputes. Now, this controversy, at least for the time being, has been put to rest by the Supreme Court in a judgment in the name of PASL Wind Solutions versus GE Power Conversion India, wherein the Supreme Court says two Indian parties can choose a foreign arbitral seat, and the parties to such foreign seated arbitrations will be able to obtain interim relief from Indian courts. The Supreme Court's decision settles an important question of law and upholds party autonomy. It also provides businesses that operate in India, including foreign companies and local subsidiaries. It has provided much needed clarity on these issues. Those entities can now choose foreign arbitral seats, even if the subject matter of their contracts and counterparties are entirely situated within India. So I think this is the biggest step that India has taken to get in line with international best practices, and the entire law of arbitration is based on autonomy of parties. So if the mechanisms are more developed in other jurisdictions, there should have been no bar on the Indian parties to exercise those jurisdictions or take help of this jurisdiction. So now this has been clarified. Two domestic parties can very well choose the foreign seat of arbitration and make part 2 of the Act applicable. So although this is believed to be a very niche topic, I believe that I have broadly, in the time available to me, I have broadly tried to cover some of the fundamentals. And I think with this, we come to the end of the first part of the discussion, which is international commercial arbitration, some fundamentals and some recent legal developments. And Jay, over to you. If with your leave, if we could proceed to the second part of this presentation.
Yes, Mr. Gordon.
Any questions in this regard? If there are any questions in this regard?
No, I think I'm pretty much at peace with whatever you said. Everything was self-explanatory and most of the questions have already been answered. So you can very well proceed with your next segment on a career in international commercial arbitration. And if you could even illustrate your personal experiences also, the journey that you undertook for building a career in this field.
All right, so I think that's an interesting question because initially at the end of law school, even I could not decide whether I want to go for a completely corporate sort of environment or do I want litigation. There are pros and cons. There are pros and cons of both. I had a background in commerce, and I would like to correct Jay over there. I had never finished my company secretaryship. I just pursued till the executive level, and then I started working. So I never really finished the company secretaryship, but I believe that I got practical exposure to the aspects of the professional program. But nonetheless, coming back to what the question is, what I found in corporate law was that it was although very consuming and demanding, but it was not putting all my skills to test. I happen to be very fond of public speaking. That skill was not being put to test there. Over there, most of the dealing was with clients, and you never saw. In litigation, we see adversarial litigation. You have to face a court, you have to face questions. It's dynamic in nature. You have to face the other counsel, but corporate was never really providing me with those opportunities. Then, of course, after having worked in a purely corporate profile, I definitely came back to Jaipur and I started pursuing a career in litigation. Thankfully, because of the organization that I was working with and because of the patronage of my senior, Mr. Ajashat Meena, I was put in a position where I could work on both the sides. And honestly, I have never been happier in this profession because I get to see the best of both the worlds. And what I've seen is that it is possible if we believe that you need to specialize without taking anything away from the benefits of specialization. It is wonderful if you're already clear about whether you want to pursue litigation or you want a career in corporate law. It is wonderful if you're clear about that. Then this talk is probably not for you. But for those of you who are bothered with the current professional climate, I would say that hybrid, when we are talking about corporate law, litigation, I think everyone already understands litigation is adversarial litigation. It is going before a court, pleading your case, representing the client. That is litigation. But I think there are certain misconceptions about what corporate law entails or what a corporate law practice entails. What usually comes to mind is that those are high ticket transactions, mergers and acquisitions, infrastructure, very complex fields, business oriented. What I would say is that you have to understand it in the correct perspective. For me, corporate law is anything which is not litigation in nature. And that also involves simple things like drafting basic business agreements, making a due diligence report, making a regulatory report. Trust me, the skill set that you require to research a matter which you have to argue before a court of law, the skill set involved is pretty much the same. The presentation is different. Of course, you're dealing with only the client here, but that is absolutely possible at the start of your career, especially if you're trying to build a career in litigation. So litigation is very time consuming, but what I'm discussing right now is something which is beyond time consuming. It is something which you have to do out of your own ownership. Whatever spare time is left, you have to make sure that you're up to date with all the business developments, especially securities law, regulatory aspects, because that is what most of corporate law entails. Now, why that? Again, over there also there is a misconception that it is not available in tier 2 cities. But I would say that such corporate work is available in abundance in tier 2 cities. The number of businesses that we have, especially in Jaipur, and the kind of services they require regarding drafting of business agreements, regarding the policy climate, all that is a part of corporate law practice and can easily be done. And can easily be done if you have a very robust litigation practice. Probably you will never get the time for it. But I happen to be in an organization where I get a chance to work on both sides, and I believe that that is a very rewarding rewarding way of practicing the profession for a few reasons. Number one, if you are also drafting the document which you have to ultimately go and defend in court, trust me, you're way better prepared. My senior always tells me one thing that we prepare for the best but draft for the worst. We have to prepare for the worst eventualities. So once you are drafting those very set of clauses which are the subject of interpretation by courts of law, you are in a much better position to go and argue those points before the court of law. And as I said, if you are really interested on exploring the corporate side of things, start small. You can draft basic business agreements, as I've already decided there, as I've already discussed earlier. And you could go for small due diligence reports, and this way you will get a lot of exposure, and it puts you in a much better position. If you happen to have your own practice in the future, then you'll never have to say no to a client, because you know the fundamentals of both the kinds of work. Hard work remains the same across both the streams. And I think ultimately at the end of the day, it's what you can take and what is the extra mileage you're prepared to go. So Jay, I think briefly, this is what it is about Liticorp. If there are any further questions that you would want to ask, I'll be more than happy to.
Yeah, so I have two quick questions for you, Suvir. Number one, do you think that when a law student pursues CS, the course on company secretary, does it help a person build a career in corporate law or in transactional practice? And number two, which was that internship that proved to be a turning point in your life in the field of arbitration?
Field of arbitration,
if not an internship, then any such event that happened where you were able to identify your passion and then you work towards a career in arbitration.
All right. So what I would like to clarify over here is that although my specialty happens to be arbitration happens to be the current expertise that I have, but previously, going with my philosophy of trying out whatever is possible with the best amount of hard work possible, I have earlier handled service matter litigations, miscellaneous litigations, and as a part of doing those miscellaneous litigations, I came across a lot of arbitration matters. And honestly, I would like to let people know one thing here, that while I was in law college, arbitration was one of the subjects that I liked the least, because I found that in some way it was a lesser form of law or a lesser form of litigation per se. I could not have been further away from the truth. The way the courts function in India, it is very difficult to know what stages a case moves through. That I believe is one of the major challenges of litigation, that ultimately the matter which you start, probably you never see the end of it. You do not ultimately see if there is an award passed, the execution happens to be tricky, or there are other issues involved, there are a lot of forums involved. What happened is that I happened to be involved in an arbitration matter just when I had joined this chamber. And I happened to see the entire process from the sending of, from the pre-arbitration negotiation to the drafting of the arbitral notice for appointment of arbitrator, and subsequently all that can arise out of an arbitration, a section 11 application, a section 9 application, a section 34 application, everything. So once I got familiar with the law, I realized that there is a lot of potential for this field of law, because arbitration is very fast becoming the preferred mode of dispute resolution, especially the way the law is moving in India. I believe that very soon, and there are a lot of good arbitral institutions in India right now. So I think looking at the future, I thought that this would become a lucrative field of practice, but that does not take away from the fact that I actively attend High Court proceedings, and I am very much interested and involved in the proceedings before the High Court. Arbitration just happens to be what I've been doing a lot of late.
There you go then. So to all the viewers who are watching, a very important point that was made by Mr. Gaur, that it is that specialization comes after you do the groundwork. So it is very important to do and to be exposed to different types of laws. It is very important to diversify your litigation portfolio, to attend court hearings before you decide where you want to specialize in, especially when you practice before, whether your practice is before a high court or a trial court. It is very important not to say no to anything in the beginning of teething years of legal practice, because it is then that you identify what you're passionate about, and then subsequently you can take a call as to which field you will specialize in. So thank you so much there, Mr. Suvir Gaur. That was Mr. Suvir Gaur on international commercial arbitration. To all the viewers who are watching, who are glued to their respective devices, our email is mentioned in the channel. In case of any queries or any of the fundamentals, feel free to write to us. We'll be more than happy to forward it as it is to our speaker, to our amicus for today's session, Mr. Suvir Gaur, or you can even write to him directly. So thank you so much, Mr. Suvir Gaur, once again for taking out time from your schedule. And
thanks a lot, Jay. Thanks a lot for having me over. Parting words would be that if you have chosen to be a part of the legal profession, persevere. It will take a lot of it.
So words of wisdom coming there from Mr. Gaur. So thank you. A big thank you to all the viewers for your patient listening, for your patient viewing. And stay tuned. Next episode is on its way. Please like, subscribe, share my channel, and stay home, stay safe. Venture out only when it's very essential. It's goodbye for now. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Gaur.
Thank you, Jay.